I'm Bonnie Glaser, Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to the China Global Podcast. The United States and China are locked in a race for dominance in artificial intelligence, including its applications and diffusion. American and Chinese AI firms like OpenAI and DeepSeek, respectively, have captured global attention, and major companies like Google and Microsoft have been actively investing in AI development. While the United States currently boasts world-leading AI models, China is ahead in some areas of AI research and application. With the release of U.S. and Chinese AI action plans last month, we may be on the cusp of a new phase in U.S.-China AI competition. Why is AI so important for a country's global influence and power? What are the strengths of China's AI strategy? And what does China's new AI action plan tell us about its AI ambitions? To discuss these questions, we're joined by Owen Daniels. He's the Associate Director of Analysis at Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, as well as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. His recently published article in Foreign Affairs, co-authored with Hanna Dohmen, titled China's Overlooked AI Strategy, provides insights into how Beijing is utilizing AI to gain global dominance and what the U.S. can and should do to sustain and bolster its lead. Welcome to the China Global Podcast, Owen.
Hi, Bonnie. Thanks very much for having me.
So let's start with a broad question. Why is AI such an important asset in a country's power portfolio? And what are the risks to the United States of China taking leadership in the AI industry?
Sure. So it's a great question. I think often in the policy community, at least, AI is often spoken in terms of how it may confer hard power benefits when it comes to U.S.-China competition. So typically thinking about areas like in the military domain or in kind of geopolitics and strategy. But I think an important current that policymakers need to be aware of is this idea, mostly emerging from the private sector and the people who develop AI, that it's going to be this transformative technology that unlocks human potential in areas like the economy, healthcare, medicine, education, that I think is really resonant with probably the average person a little bit more than maybe the policy community. So, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA has said that AI will be the most transformative technology of the 21st century. Satya Nadella of Microsoft said AI will be integral to solving the world's biggest problems. I think Sam Altman said on a podcast last week that no child born from today onward will be smarter than AI. So there's kind of a huge excitement and potential around what AI could bring to the world. I came up with the idea for this article earlier this year in Paris, where there was a lot of conversation about AI's potential at the Action Summit there. And I think it links really closely to a notion popularized by the late political scientist Joseph Nye of soft power. So soft power refers to this idea that countries can influence the preferences of other actors through perceived shared values, cultural attractiveness, persuasive ideas. And Paris followed a month after the DeepSeek R1 release, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But it essentially offered the possibility that users around the globe could get really open access to a powerful AI model and adapt it to their local needs. So I think this introduces some interesting dynamics for US-China competition we'll talk about. But I think in terms of the stakes you mentioned for China taking a lead in AI, I think you can kind of think of it in at least three broad buckets. There's the economic stakes that Chinese companies outcompete American companies and are more widely adopted into technology stacks around the globe, which I think comes with attendant risks in terms of like espionage and data access. They're kind of the security risks I mentioned, that maybe the PLA gains an advantage over the US military through a Chinese developed cutting edge advancement in AI. And then I think there are the political soft power risks of China as being seen as a diffuser of technology and the US as a gatekeeper. And so I think this becomes more challenging for strategy makers. Some of the risks and opportunities of AI perhaps aren't nicely fit into discrete buckets that we might look at from a policy perspective.
So let's dig into a little bit the AI models that you wrote about and just referred to, with DeepSeek and Moonshot AI. So why is the release of these two AI models so significant? What are the implications for AI competition that these AI models present?
Sure. So in the article that Hanna and I wrote, we mentioned specifically DeepSeek's R1 and Kimi's K2. There are other powerful Chinese open models like Alibaba's Qwen models. And really, they're significant because they offer a high level of performance that's comparable with models produced by OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, while also having a high level of adaptability and openness. So I'll explain a little bit more what that means. I'm speaking a little generally here to try to give your audience a big picture. But broadly speaking, open models have open weights. So that means that you can get into the guts of the model, and it allows a greater range of actors, particularly researchers, usually in academic or commercial fields, who might not have access to the advanced computing power or financial resources needed to access a closed model, like some of ChatGPT's previous models. And essentially, it allows researchers to visit an open model repository, browse the models they want for their specific use cases. You could think of generative models, natural language processing, computer vision, whatever it is. And then they can download, fine-tune, and adapt it to their use case. So, for instance, you could have a researcher in Nigeria downloading a model and training it on data that's related to specific issues related to like that data or healthcare environment. And so what made the DeepSeek moment back in January really significant was that it produced a Chinese model that was highly capable in spite of the fact that the US had imposed export controls on China that were explicitly aimed at kind of trying to limit China's ability to produce these really sophisticated models. So it kind of circumvented the main goals of the export controls, while at the same time demonstrating that these open, powerful capabilities could be democratized to a wider range of actors.
How would you describe the differences between China's approach to AI and the US approach to AI? Is it sort of companies, or is it really fundamentally two countries have very different approaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, as you and your audience might know, China's long embraced kind of an open technological approach, and it's often looked abroad for advancements that it can adopt at home. My colleagues Bill Hannis and Huimi Chang have done some work on how China will look abroad to adopt advancements domestically that can benefit it. So it's kind of coupled this openness and willingness to look abroad with a very strong domestic AI development ecosystem. So in terms of the actors, I would say the private sector is driving progress in both countries, but the emphasis on openness has been baked into Chinese government policy for essentially a decade. If you look back at plans like the 2017 Next Generation AI Development Plan, it calls for open model development. The 14th Five-Year Plan from 2021 does the same. And both of these plans are very open about China's ambitions to lead globally in AI by 2030, kind of on the back of an open approach. I would argue as well in AI that China's approach has long been kind of tied towards achieving advancements that can be translated into the quote unquote real economy, right? So I think in the US AI ecosystem over the last few years, specifically companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google to some extent have been really focused on producing frontier models and competing with one another to develop really powerful general purpose models. Within China, there is some competition to develop frontier models, but there's also an emphasis on building tools that can be used in the quote unquote real economy. So that can be used to benefit good and service provision. And so there's a focus on applications there that I think has been slightly slower to develop in the US AI ecosystem. Xi Jinping last month kind of made a statement to the People's Daily that essentially said, not everybody in every province has to be working on AI development. So it's an interesting contrast. I think there are hints that some of that might be changing in the United States, but I would say that's broadly been a few of the key differences over the last few years.
So you've definitely highlighted some of the advantages of China's approach to AI strategy. So let me ask you if you see any disadvantages going forward. Are there any limitations that you think that China will face because of its approach, or any setbacks that you think it might experience down the road?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think in terms of some of the risks of China's strategy, when it comes to exporting Chinese technology, I think there are trust deficits that China may have to overcome in terms of its reputation for taking others' technological advancements and incorporating them into their own system, or perhaps the risk that using Chinese AI technology exposes countries' national data to risk in terms of how China might try to access it. So I think that is kind of one constraint, particularly as China looks to cooperate more globally and with other countries that are perhaps more capable in AI, for instance, in Europe. I think on the technical side, the major obstacle that China is going to face in its strategy it has to do with computing power. So a lot of China's current limitations are compute-based. That refers to the semiconductor access or cloud computing access that they need to develop and deploy the most powerful cutting-edge models. So as I mentioned earlier, DeepSeek R1 was notable because it showed Chinese companies could get around export controls to develop powerful models and circumvent some of the logic of U.S. export controls. But China still lacks access to the semiconductor manufacturing equipment to develop some of its own highly advanced compute capabilities. And in addition, I think as these models are more focused on kind of the inference paradigm in AI, basically being deployed globally to a wider user base, China's access to chips that are focused specifically on inference may limit its ability to deploy its models more broadly.
As you said earlier, Owen, you focused in the Foreign Affairs article about connecting how China's using AI to further advance its soft power, especially in the developing world, in the global South. So, how is AI being used by Beijing as a diplomatic tool to expand Chinese influence? Is it similar to the way it uses other tools in the developing world? Is there something unique about how it's using AI?
Sure. So I will caveat this by saying I am looking at this mostly from the AI angle. I'm not a China expert, nor do I pretend to be. So I'll try to caveat this a little bit in advance. But I think where China has been really effective is in its messaging about how it wants to develop AI globally in an inclusive way. And I think this taps into a couple of really important streams. First, polling suggests that there is far greater optimism among countries in the global South about AI's potential to transform society. So in 2025, the Edelman Trust earlier this year conducted a poll that found that trust in AI was highest in China, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Thailand, and the developing world more generally than in the West. And the proportion of Indians, for instance, like who consider AI to be trustworthy was more than double that of Americans. And so there is kind of there's a higher optimism about how AI could transfer benefits to society in the global South. And China, I think, is explicitly trying to kind of tap into that vein by offering models that are more powerful and can be adapted by users in countries where there's perhaps less wealth to access closed models that are typically behind companies' paywalls. And so I think this is an extension, on the one hand, of China's efforts to diffuse its technology around the globe, particularly in its kind of immediate neighborhood. We've seen some of this before in efforts like the Digital Silk Road. But I think what is unique about the AI effort this time is that it's so tied to rhetoric about inclusivity, collective advancement, and really expanding the benefits of AI to a broader group of countries that aren't often part of the Western AI discussion as explicitly.
I want to turn to the AI action plans that were rolled out in the last month and start with China's AI plan. And it was at the 2025 World AI Governance and High-Level Meeting on Global AI Governance that was held last month. And apparently, there were some really interesting points in it. So I want to just give you an opportunity to explain what the salient actions are or ideas that are in that plan. How does it complement China's global AI soft power governance goals? And are you able to glean from the contents of the plan what its real purpose is and what more about what China's goals are?
Yeah, sure. So the timing of these plans being released as closely as they were, I think it was only 3 days apart or something. I would imagine that's not entirely coincidental. And so I think stepping back, we can talk a little bit more about the Trump plan, but I think the big difference to me between the American AI Action Plan and the Chinese Global AI Governance Action Plan was the rhetorical framing. So obviously the US plan was a very nationally focused document. There was a lot of rhetorical framing around the idea of placing the US at the center of the global AI ecosystem. The word dominance was used to describe like how the US wanted to situate itself globally with respect to AI. We want US dominance in AI technology, and we want AI technology in global stacks. The Chinese framing through their kind of governance action plan was far more inclusive. It emphasized global progress, a lot of the ideas we've been talking about already, about bringing the global south along, working through cooperative forums. At least for AI, perhaps unsurprisingly, China emphasized a lot of enthusiasm for working through the United Nations. And so the framing between dominance and kind of cooperation and inclusivity was a really interesting point of departure between the two documents. Now, does China necessarily wants that kind of inclusive approach, or is that a rhetorical device? It's hard to tell, right? So there's some interesting language in the plan about avoiding duplication of investment and waste of resources. Whose investment is not being duplicated is an interesting question. Whose resources aren't being wasted? Is it developing countries that China can export its own technology to that it's already invested in? To me, that seems like a little bit of subtext. But I would say, broadly speaking, the key points to the Chinese plan had to do with promoting the global popularization and application of AI. So again, really globally focused, maximizing benefits to the developing world. There's a lot of talk about empowering global economic and social development in the plan and kind of adhering to the spirit of openness, which I think speaks to the open models emphasis. Again, like emphasizing the United Nations Compact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact, I think indicate how China is perhaps less comfortable working through Western or perceived Western dominated venues when it comes to cooperative AI initiatives. And it really presents a fairly distinct vision from the US plan.
So in the US plan, do you detect any specific imprint by President Trump on this plan? Is there something about it that is really a departure from what we have seen under the Biden administration's effort to promote AI? And is there specifically a China component in the plan? And does it address, how the U.S. should compete with China to ensure that the U.S. retains the lead in AI?
So I think to me, the one of the aspects that is most fascinating when it comes to competition with China in the US AI action plan had to do with open models. So previously, the Biden administration was very focused on controlling the diffusion of closed models for all the security concerns and reasons that I mentioned previously. I think what the AI action plan indicated is that the Trump administration sees a role for AI companies to compete with leading Chinese open model developers. And so I would imagine that, a lot of the implementation details when it comes to the AI action plan remain to be seen. So I think there are kind of open questions about how the administration encourages the development of a stronger open model ecosystem. The plan is offering policy recommendations, not necessarily embracing policy. So again, we'll have to see how the implementation works, but I think that area is one of the most notable when it comes to competition with China. In other ways, I think the plan expresses, from an AI researcher perspective, a lot of continuity with the previous administration's plans. So it attracted a lot of attention for kind of the deregulatory tone. I think if you look at previous federal level actions on AI, a lot of it, when it came to the leading AI companies, was related to voluntary compliance. And so actually, I think in some of those regards, there's less departure in the plan. And I think we might want to talk about this a little more, but I think the possibility of easing export controls is another area that might evolve compared to previous administrations.
Interesting. One of the things that I noted in China's proposal when it was rolled out was that they have put forward this initiative of creating a World AI Cooperation Organization that would be headquartered in Shanghai. That strikes me as important because obviously institutions can help to really amplify China's role in AI as a leader. And I wonder if maybe it's early days, but have there been any reactions from any other countries? Do you anticipate that China will be successful in really putting itself and an organization in place in Shanghai that might enable it to have a really outsized influence on international architecture of AI governance?
Sure. I think it's a really fascinating question to contend with. So under the Biden administration, a lot of work was done to establish an AI safety institute and to in the United States, and to encourage countries that had like-minded approaches to AI governance and safety to also develop AI safety institutes. And so under the Commerce Department and NIST, basically the National Institute of Standards and Technology, we had the development of an AI Safety Institute in the United States. And then after an agreement in San Francisco a couple of years ago, there was a broad network of AI Safety Institutes. And so to me, when I look at the idea that the Chinese proposed for an AI cooperation organization that's headquartered in Shanghai, there's an element of that is perhaps meant to compete or to provide an alternative vision to that kind of network of AI safety institutes that have been developed over the last several years. And so I think the Shanghai idea is particularly interesting because the AI safety institutes, perhaps compared to some other governance initiatives, are truly global. They extend into Southeast Asia, Africa, kind of beyond Western, quote unquote, Western dominated infrastructure. I think to the point that we've kind of been discussing when it comes to China looking to extend its reach into the global South, I think there's a possibility that the Shanghai Institute could become a locus of AI governance interactions for global South countries that have purchased Chinese technology or looking to use Chinese models more broadly. I think, again, that trust deficit question comes into play, and getting a broader range of actors interested in using that as kind of the locus of AI governance. But it'll be fascinating to see how that organization, how and whether it competes with the existing network of AI safety institutes.
So finally, just talk about U.S. policy a bit. I'd like to hear your views on whether you think the U.S. is on the right track in our effort to compete successfully with China. Is there more that you think the United States should do to address particularly China is what you write about, growing soft power lead in AI. Are there better ways or more things the U.S. could do to play an effective role in shaping global AI governance initiatives?
Yeah, of course. So I think there is probably an evolution that needs to be made in U.S. policy to kind of adapt to the challenge that's presented by open models, particularly in this soft power area. So under the Biden administration, a lot of AI policy discussion kind of focused on these areas of protect and promote. Protect involved export controls and kind of limiting China's ability to access leading edge compute that could help them develop advanced models. Promote involved aspects like the CHIPS Act, where we are really investing heavily at home to kind of build our AI ecosystem more strongly. I think we probably need an evolution of protect and promote that's focused on promoting a stronger open model ecosystem here in the United States and protecting some of the export controls around semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment specifically related to model inference. So I think the promotion of the stronger open ecosystem is pretty self-explanatory, right? I think we want to try to get companies, particularly AI leaders, to develop open models. There's been some movement in this over literally the past week as OpenAI has released its own open model, OSS GPT. And so it looks like the leading AI firms in the US are kind of starting to contend with this reality that open models offer a lot of benefits and they need to get involved in the game, particularly the ones that were not previously making large performant open models. I think on the export controls point, we've really seen a kind of changing paradigm in AI from using compute for model training versus model inference. So you can kind of roughly map training a model to developing it, and model inference can roughly be mapped to deploying a model. So under this kind of new paradigm that we're seeing with models like DeepSeek, inference and model deployment have become more important. And so by imposing export controls on chips that are relevant for inference, it's possible that we can slow the ability of companies like DeepSeek to kind of propagate their models more broadly, while we allow larger US companies to offer their own kind of viable alternatives to what models like DeepSeek, Qwen, Kimi, K2 can offer. So long story short, I think we're looking at an evolved policy of protect and promote under the current administration.
Great. We've been talking with Owen Daniels. He's the Associate Director of Analysis at Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology and a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. You can read his co-authored article called China's Overlooked AI Strategy in Foreign Affairs, probably foreignaffairs.com. Thanks for joining us, Owen. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bonnie. This is great.